The Mandalorian Season 3 kind of hit the reset switch on Din and Grogu, and it's left us wondering what journeys await the pair. Well, hold on to your helmets, guys, because we have a lot to talk about in regards to Season 4.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
Unfortunately, some of it is bad news.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral.
So let's start with just that, and then we'll get into all the spice going on around Season 4 at the moment, and why, despite all this, I think Season 4 will be the big season we've all been waiting for. But of course, the Star Wars project wouldn't really be a Star Wars project without all the drama going on the outside. And that all started a few months ago with Jon Favreau and Kathleen Kennedy at Lucasfilm. There were rumours going around on the internet of discontent between the pair, and the fact that Kathleen Kennedy and the higher-ups in Lucasfilm were making amendments to Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni's story to make the most of their marketing opportunities, mostly around Grogu returning to Din Djarin rather than staying with Luke Skywalker. That was seen by many as a way to simply sell more toys and of course bring in the wider audience to The Mandalorian. Now, whilst that makes complete sense from a business perspective, it doesn't necessarily sit well with the creatives that make these decisions, like taking Din away from Grogu to push the story forwards and add real development to these characters. So the rumour going around was that this didn't sit right with Jon Favreau and he was thinking of leaving The Mandalorian, and now we're getting reports that he could be making a return to the MCU to work on Marvel projects once again, and in my opinion I can totally see that happening sooner rather than later. And what really adds fuel to this fire is a recent interview that Rick Famuyiwa did with Deadline, where essentially he goes over his experience with doing Season 3 as he was an executive producer this time around. But the most interesting part of the interview for me was when Rick Famuyiwa was asked about Mandalorian Season 4 and whether or not we as fans can expect to see it anytime soon. And he goes on to say a lot of this stuff has to be thought through, built, conceived and prepped. This work takes time. That work has to get done. Jon Favreau has written the scripts. Now, of course, guys, Jon Favreau has the scripts done already for The Mandalorian Season 4, but that doesn't mean they're not going to be affected by this WGA strike, which we'll get onto in a moment. But it's this next part which piques my interest. Rick Famuyiwa goes on to say about Jon Favreau, he's excited about continuing to tell stories in the world. When and how that happens, considering everything we'll see. So what I find odd here is Rick Famuyiwa is making a point, pointing out that Jon Favreau still enjoys making Star Wars stories. Now, we see this all the time in all walks of life, when there is actually generally something going on behind the scenes and it's become public knowledge through rumours, leaks, the internet reporting and whatnot. Other people within that industry who work alongside them will come forward and try and sweep it all under the rug to make the house look very tidy on the outside. So to me, I see that as a little red flag that potentially something isn't right on the inside, and it's not just wild rumours on the internet. But then Rick Famuyiwa goes on to say when and how that happens, considering everything we'll see. Now, he could be purely about the WGA strike right now, or he could be alluding to Jon Favreau potentially being involved in other projects outside of Star Wars. Of course, if you look at the next batch of projects coming out, the Ahsoka series is mostly Dave Filoni's job. That was very much his baby. Jon Favreau had very little involvement in that. But also Skeleton Crew, the other show that comes out later on this year, that is mostly done by John Watts himself, who is directing and writing the show. The only project out of the 3 Mando shows we've had this year that's really solely Favreau is The Mandalorian. And let's not forget, in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, he killed off the one character that he played. Jon Favreau isn't just one of the directors that you get on a Star Wars movie that disappears after a few months. He has a successful track record in Star Wars, and it was his work alongside Dave Filoni that dragged Star Wars through its most difficult period post The Rise of Skywalker. People still had The Mandalorian to watch during that period of time, and the whole story that they've been building out in that space, which we're going to further explore later this year. So in my opinion, Lucasfilm do owe Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni an awful lot, and if there is any creative differences, hopefully they can work through them. Although me myself, I'm not very optimistic that perhaps Jon Favreau could be one of the next ones out the door. When you come to think of it, that might be the reason why Jon Favreau hasn't got a huge involvement in Dave Filoni's Star Wars movie. It's not a Jon and Dave movie, it's a Dave Filoni movie with Jon Favreau being an executive producer. Of course, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves right now. There's no point looking at The Mandalorian Season 4 too much alongside Dave's movie or any other Star Wars project apart from Ahsoka at this point, with these WGA writing strikes going on. And with that has brought further delays to The Mandalorian. Now previously, The Mandalorian Season 4, now the scripts are all written, was set to begin pre-production in September. However, that has now been pushed to November. And I believe that is an optimistic date. That is a date just to get it down in a diary, because these strikes aren't expected to finish before the end of the summer, and they could potentially go on for much longer. So there's no guarantee that The Mandalorian Season 4 will enter production in November. So for me personally, I'm not convinced this November production date for The Mandalorian will stick. And of course, we need to then look at how that affects the other Star Wars Disney Plus shows going forwards. Could we be set for a big delay after Ahsoka? Now, one way to approach this would be, if we look at the schedule for next year, it was meant to be The Acolyte, Andor Season 2 and The Mandalorian Season 4 being the last show of the year. Well, we already know production on Andor Season 2 has stopped and The Mandalorian Season 4 production has been delayed. The Acolyte is pretty much okay at this point in time, but after Ahsoka, if we're going to see a big gap in content in 2024 with only The Acolyte to fill it, who's to say they won't push Skeleton Crew into the beginning of 2024 and have Acolyte towards the middle to end of 2024, with Andor Season 2 and The Mandalorian Season 4 coming in 2025. Now, of course, this would be the same year that we're getting the new Jedi Order movie, with the Filoni movie set to be dropped the following year in 2026. But a delay in these Disney Plus shows would cause a problem for Dave Filoni, who's trying to work out what his movie is going to be about, who's going to be around, how far along the story is going to be in his plans. And of course, that can't happen if we haven't seen The Mandalorian Season 4 or any shows that are set to follow that, perhaps Ahsoka Season 2, The Book of Boba Fett Season 2, Mandalorian Season 5, or even Skeleton Crew Season 2. We've already got a James Mangold new Jedi Order movie set to drop in 2028, so perhaps Filoni's would then be moved to the 2027 slot, a whole 12 months later than they would have liked. Now, of course, this does seem dramatic, but like anything, it does have a knock-on effect. Or any WGA or potential DGA strikes that come around in the future can delay not just the projects that are still ongoing, that are still being created, but also the ones that are finished. You see, Disney Plus, and they've demonstrated this already, aren't afraid to move shows and even change shows' release dates that have already been announced. It would make no sense for them to have shows clustered together in a space of a few months instead of spreading them out for the whole year. Because by spreading them out, it's more than likely that people will leave their Disney Plus subscriptions running just out of convenience, as they know another show's on the horizon. But if we get rid of all the shows for the year in the first quarter, then they'll just cancel it for the rest of the year if they're only in there for Star Wars. But of course, these delays and how these delays are going to affect the other projects going forwards is just my speculation. But to me, it makes total sense from a business perspective for them to want to spread it out and bring in the most money possible. So it really does seem like if these strikes don't end sooner rather than later, and it looks like they won't, we could be set for a bit of a dry spell. But one show we know that will be safe from all this is the Ahsoka series, rumoured to drop on the 31st of August. That show's completely done. It's probably only going through its final stages, its final finishing touches in post-production at this point. And the Ahsoka series will act as a key part to The Mandalorian Season 4 and all the other Mandoverse Disney Plus shows and Dave Filoni's movie going forwards, as it's going to give us the introduction for the big bad at this point in time, which is going to be Grand Admiral Thrawn, which we're going to further explore in the Filoni movie. But more than that, in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, as you know, we spent a lot of time with the New Republic. I believe the Ahsoka series is now going to bridge Ahsoka and the Thrawn issues to the New Republic, which of course is then going to tie in Din Djarin and Grogu. And if the Ahsoka series is as good as the trailer shows it to be, and the leaks are on point, then this is going to be a phenomenal season and we're in for a real treat. This should more than tie us over for a little while at least, as we await to see how these strikes play out and learn what project is actually going to drop next and when it's going to be. And hopefully find out if Skeleton Crew is going to stick to a release this year or it's going to be pushed to next year. Now, in my opinion, honestly, I do hope these strikes come to an end sooner rather than later, with both sides reaching an agreement they're happy with, so we can just get on to watching the Disney Plus shows and enjoying Star Wars once again. Do you think Dave Filoni is at a point in his career where he can take it on his own? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll catch you in the next one. Leave a like. This is the way.